The bell above the diner door chimed softly as Emily Carter stepped inside for her evening shift. The sound barely noticed over the low hum of clinking dishes, murmured conversations, and the constant sizzle from the grill behind the counter. The diner was old, the kind of place where the vinyl booths were cracked from decades of use and the smell of coffee seemed permanently soaked into the walls. Emily liked it that way. It was predictable, safe, or at least it usually was. She tied her apron, smoothed her plain grey uniform, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her movements careful and quiet, as if she were trying not to disturb the air around her. At 23, Emily had learned that staying unnoticed was often the best way to survive. She had learned it in school hallways where laughter followed her like a shadow, and later in life where people mistook her silence for weakness. Tonight she hoped for nothing more than a routine shift, serve food, refill coffee, smile politely, and go home with aching feet and a few extra dollars in tips. Emily moved from table to table with practiced efficiency, her soft voice barely rising above the clatter of plates. Most customers barely looked at her, and she was fine with that. An elderly couple smiled kindly when she poured their coffee. A tired truck driver thanked her with a nod. These small moments of decency were enough to carry her through the long hours. She didn't complain. She never did. Her manager, Rick, often said she was the easiest waitress to work with, never late, never loud, never problematic. What Rick didn't know was that Emily had trained herself to disappear. After her parents died in a car accident years ago, it had just been her and her older brother, Daniel. Daniel had always been the loud one, the protector, the one who stood between her and the world. When he enlisted in the Navy, she'd told him she'd be fine. She'd lied. The diner door swung open again, harder this time, and laughter spilled inside before the men did. 4 of them, loud, confident. The kind of men who filled a room simply by existing in it. They wore leather jackets and boots, their voices rough and careless, already drawing irritated glances from other customers. Emily felt her shoulders tense as she watched them slide into a booth near the center of the diner. She'd seen their type before, men who treated kindness like a weakness and silence like an invitation. Rick glanced at Emily and jerked his chin toward the table. "Your section," he said casually, already turning away. Emily swallowed and nodded. She grabbed menus and approached the booth, her steps measured, her face neutral. "Good evening," she said softly. "Can I get you something to drink?" One of the men leaned back, eyeing her openly, his smirk slow and deliberate. "Well, look at this," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "They got themselves a shy little mouse working here." The others laughed. Emily kept her gaze down, writing on her pad. "Coffee? Soda?" she asked, her voice steady despite the heat creeping up her neck. Another man leaned forward, invading her space. "How about a smile first?" he said. "Isn't that what waitresses are for?" More laughter. Emily forced a small, polite smile, the kind she had perfected over years of practice. "What would you like to drink?" she repeated. They ordered, dragging it out, making comments about her voice, her hands, the way she stood. Emily absorbed it all in silence, the way she always had. Words were easier to endure than confrontation. She returned with their drinks and placed them carefully on the table, but as she turned to leave, one of the men reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey," he said, squeezing just enough to hurt. "Don't rush off. We're not done with you." Emily froze. The diner seemed to go quiet around them, though she knew the sounds hadn't actually stopped. Her heart pounded. "Please let go," she said softly. The man chuckled and released her wrist, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Relax. We're just having fun." Emily stepped back and hurried toward the counter, her hands trembling as she poured coffee for another table. Rick noticed her pale face but said nothing. He rarely did. When she returned with the food later, the men were already louder, their plates pushed aside as if the diner belonged to them, One of them deliberately knocked over his glass as she set down a plate, soda spilling across the table and onto the floor. "Oops," he said with a grin. "Clumsy me." Emily grabbed napkins and knelt to clean the mess, her cheeks burning. "Careful down there," another man said. "Wouldn't want you getting on your knees too often." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Something inside Emily tightened. She stood up slowly, meeting their eyes for just a moment. There was no anger on her face, only a quiet exhaustion. "I'll get you a refill," she said, turning away. She didn't see the hand coming. The slap echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Pain exploded across her cheek, her head snapping to the side as gasps rippled through the room. Emily staggered, barely catching herself on the edge of the booth. The world tilted, sound rushing in her ears. For a split second, no one moved. Then one of the men laughed. "Damn," he said. "Didn't mean to hit you that hard." Emily's cheek burned, tears stinging her eyes, but she didn't cry. She straightened slowly, her hand hovering near her face, her breathing shallow. Rick rushed over, his face pale. "Hey, what the hell is going on?" he demanded. The man who'd slapped her shrugged. "She got in my space," he said. "Accidents happen." Rick looked at Emily, then at the men, torn between outrage and fear of confrontation. "You need to leave," he said finally, his voice weak.